day, 'cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Рейган – это кондовый консерватор. И
Reagan was a staunch conservative.
в таком положении, когда он
So for him, coming from that background, it was easier to make the move towards us and meet us halfway. Someone else might not have been able to do it, and the chance could have been lost.
И шанс мог быть упущен.
La Guerra Fría, la Guerra de las Galaxias, 1981-1988.
One more time.
Stand by your man. Give him two arms to cling to.
Un concierto en los jardines de la Casa Blanca para una vieja estrella de Hollywood que se convirtió en presidente de Estados Unidos.
Stand by your man.
I knew that Ronald Reagan would bring this country back to the place it belonged. Not make you ashamed you as an American, make you proud you to be an American.
Ronald Reagan had the ability to convey whatever he was thinking of in terms that everybody understood. He just seemed to have a warmness about him that the people felt.
Now you're making me nervous. I love you. You're wonderful. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the B-1B.
Ronald Reagan, un anticomunista acérrimo en la mayor parte de su vida adulta, creía que Estados Unidos había quedado atrás de la Unión Soviética en la carrera armamentista.
I urge you to beware the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault. To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
En los primeros años de la presidencia de Reagan parecía que el poder militar de la Unión Soviética estaba en su máximo nivel.
I had no doubt that the Soviet goal was world domination. Their military posture, their actions, their foreign policy actions, their aggressive behavior, all of this contributed to that single conclusion.
La Unión Soviética había llegado primero al espacio, pero acechaba un miedo en los corazones de los máximos comandantes soviéticos, el miedo a la superioridad tecnológica estadounidense.
I had a meeting in Moscow with Marshal Agarkov, the chief of staff of the Soviet Armed Forces. And he said, you know, all modern military capability is based on the computer. You have little kids in America, 3 years old, who know how to deal with computers. It takes years here to train Soviet recruits in the military to use them because they've never used them before. We're afraid of computers. If we start deploying computers, it's going to mean loss of political control for the Soviet leadership.
Los ancianos líderes del Kremlin estaban aún dispuestos a soportar el costo agobiante de ser una superpotencia. Para la gente de la Unión Soviética, esto representaba el limitado abastecimiento de los productos básicos.
The standard of living was very low. We lived from payday to payday. We couldn't feed our children properly. The food that was available was so poor. And the queues. We used to spend 3, 4, 5 hours queuing for some lousy sausage.
Brezhnev introdujo una cara nueva en las filas del liderazgo del Kremlin, Mikhail Gorbachev. Se le ordenó que reformara la agricultura soviética. La tierra que Stalin había colectivizado brutalmente nunca había producido en abundancia. La agricultura soviética era muy ineficiente.
When I became a director of Lach Institute, which was responsible for space launches, the first priority was to supply workforce to collective farms during the harvest, and only then to consider how we can save our next launch program.
Система трещала.
The system was breaking down.
Она не давала возможности реализовать себя.
People were rejecting it because it didn't allow them to find satisfaction or to show any initiative in their work. It didn't allow people to speak out freely.
Суждений.
El presidente Reagan fue descrito por una minoría ruidosa de estadounidenses y por muchos europeos como un belicista.
Ronnie, you're not dressed up scary for Halloween.
Nance, if John F. Kennedy were alive today, he'd be younger than I am. I'm 75 years old, and I've got my finger on the button. I just couldn't think of anything more scary than that. Trick or treat, fellas.
Estados Unidos y la Unión Soviética ya poseían arsenales nucleares suficientes para borrarse uno al otro del mapa. Ambos lados introducían constantemente misiles más potentes y precisos. La renovada carrera armamentista y el discurso antisoviético de Reagan reactivó el movimiento antinuclear en Europa Occidental. Los manifestantes por la paz no imaginaron que el rechazo que sentían por las armas nucleares también tenía eco en la Casa Blanca.
The president viewed the concept of deterrence between us and the Soviet Union as no different than holding a cocked gun at each other's heads. It was very clear to me from the beginning that he was, to say the least, extremely uncomfortable. And as I began to understand later on, he was fundamentally, morally, ethically opposed to the concept of mutual assured destruction and deterrence as we know it.
Los avances de las computadoras y de la tecnología láser prometían darle a Reagan y al mundo entero una salida al conflicto nuclear. Se adelantaba un nuevo sistema de defensa revolucionario.
What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies? I know this is a formidable technical task, one that may not be accomplished before the end of this century. I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete.
Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight from Washington. President Reagan today followed up last night's defense policy speech. He gave the go-ahead to develop a space-age system designed to neutralize an enemy nuclear missile attack, a system domestic critics today called too high cost, too high tech, too pie in the sky.
Suppose we had been talking in terms of 1940, and somebody had said, we can take a little atom. An atom is something you can't see. But when we explode that little atom, we can destroy a whole city. Would you have believed it? Would you have said, let's try it? Franklin Roosevelt said yes. Franklin Roosevelt is in history as a hero. For what? Producing an offensive weapon of mass destruction. Ronald Reagan, on the other hand, came into office and said, hey, we should have something that will stop this.
La iniciativa de defensa estratégica de Reagan, la IDE, conocida como la Guerra de las Galaxias por la película, contemplaba armas en satélites y en tierra que destruirían los misiles soviéticos con dardos y rayos láser.
It was a shock. Was us. It's like all our hopes for beginning of the understanding how dangerous is this militarization of space just suddenly very evaporated.
All the parity and stability created over many years through arms procurement and negotiations were disrupted. It meant that we too would need to spend huge amounts of money. It would begin a new phase in the arms race.
Muchos políticos y científicos estadounidenses hicieron campaña contra lo que consideraron como el costoso disparate de Reagan.
The heavens are for wonder, not for war. Stop Star Wars. Stop weapons in space.
Los críticos de Reagan aseguraron que la IDE era demasiado costosa y que nunca funcionaría. Estaban horrorizados con las reducciones de los programas de bienestar social necesarias para financiarlo. Ronald Reagan descubrió que su aliada cercana, la primera ministra Margaret Thatcher, tampoco apoyaba a la IDE. Como firme creyente de la fuerza disuasiva nuclear, trató de persuadir a su amigo que abandonara su preciada Guerra de las Galaxias.
Staff around the table afterwards said that Reagan had really gotten handbagged that day, and he called me to the Oval Office the next morning and he said, Bud, Margaret and we are just not getting along on this SDI issue. I wish you'd go to London and see if you can't at least lower the level of criticism publicly. We're going to have a tough time getting appropriations if this keeps up. She gave me the same lecture she'd given 2 weeks before, and seeing I was getting nowhere, I interjected during a pause. Prime Minister President Reagan believes that there's at least $300 million a year that ought to be subcontracted to British companies that would support SDI. And there was a long pause. She finally said, there may be something to this after all.
Leonid Brezhnev murió en noviembre de 1982. Fue reemplazado por el enfermo jefe de la KGB, Yuri Andropov. A Andropov le asustaban la IDE y los discursos antisoviéticos de Reagan. Convencido de que Occidente planeaba una guerra, Andropov ordenó una alarma mundial. La KGB vigilaba cada aspecto de la vida en Occidente.
The banking system was to be closely watched, as were the hospitals and road-building programs. Were the banks attempting to convert their system to a war footing? Were hospitals preparing new beds and setting up blood banks for massive numbers of wounded?
Estados Unidos aumentó el número de aviones espías en las áreas más importantes a lo largo de la frontera de la Unión Soviética. Los aviones equipados con aparatos de vigilancia electrónica parecían vuelos comerciales que volaban con frecuencia cerca de las rutas de pasajeros.
In this period, 81, 82, and especially 83, how did it feel on the front line? Well, we were flying more often as there were more spy planes provoking us. We were in a constant state of tension.
El 31 de agosto de 1983, un avión de la aerolínea surcoreana KAL, vuelo 007 con 269 pasajeros a bordo, salió de Anchorage rumbo a Seúl. El Boeing 747 se desvió de su ruta normal y entró al espacio aéreo de la Unión Soviética.
I received a phone call informing me that an unidentified plane had been spotted over Kamchatka and that our attempts to contact it had been unsuccessful. I ensured that all the forces at our disposal were immediately put on alert. I said, take all measures so that it is either forced to land on Sakhalin or, if it will not cooperate, shoot it down.
I could see 2 rows of windows which were lit up. I wondered if it was a civilian aircraft. Military cargo planes don't have such windows. I wondered what kind of plane it was, but I had no time to think. I had a job to do. I started to signal to him in international code. I informed him that he'd violated our airspace. He did not respond.
Despite the signals from our planes, including warning shots with tracers, the pilot failed to react, simply continuing on his course.
My orders were to destroy the intruder. I fulfilled my mission.
El avión surcoreano fue derribado sobre la isla Sajalín. Todas las personas a bordo murieron.
The United States reacts with revulsion to this attack. Loss of life appears to be heavy. We can see no excuse whatsoever for this appalling act.
We came to the conclusion that we simply needed to be honest and admit an unfortunate incident has occurred. There was a pilot error, bad weather. One thing led to another. It was not a pre-planned action. No one wanted this. It was a tragic mistake. We went to Kornienko, the deputy foreign minister, who agreed with us, but he was not able to convince the leadership. This was a question of prestige, and the military don't like to admit mistakes.
Ahora una sensación de crisis envolvía tanto a Oriente como a Occidente. Las conversaciones sobre el control de armas se suspendieron. Los cohetes soviéticos SS-20 se enfrentaban a los misiles Crucero y Pershing desplegados en Europa Occidental. Los líderes soviéticos creían que era inminente un ataque nuclear por parte de Occidente. Un agente inglés dentro de la KGB envió advertencias a Londres.
When I told the British, they simply couldn't believe that the Soviet leadership was so stupid and narrow-minded as to believe in something so impossible. I said to them, okay, I'll get you the documents.
I think only a tiny handful of people knew the full details of how fearful they were, and we knew them, as is now public knowledge, through some extremely well-placed agents who were able to pass on the information that the Russians actually feared that the West was preparing for aggressive nuclear war against the Soviet Union.
Surgieron las preocupaciones de los aliados y del país. Reagan trató de tranquilizar a Andropov.
Just suppose with me for a moment that an Ivan and an Anya could find themselves, say, in a waiting room or sharing a shelter from the rain or a storm with a Jim and Sally. And there was no language barrier to keep them from getting acquainted. Would they then debate the differences between their respective governments? Or would they find themselves comparing notes about their children and what each other did for a living?
Ronald Reagan, animado por su esposa Nancy, consultó a Suzanne Massie, una escritora muy popular en Rusia, para que le ayudara a entender a sus adversarios de la Guerra Fría.
President Reagan was, of course, a people person. He loved people, and he had great instinct for people. I had been told by these fellows at the White House that, of course, if I were ever writing anything for the president, it had to be double-spaced 1.5 pages. Well, what can you get from that? President Reagan had never seen a Russian in the first 3 years. He couldn't go there. He was an actor. Actors like to absorb from feeling. I said, Mr. President, if you are reelected, will this policy of small steps toward better relations be a continuing policy of your administration? And Ronald Reagan had a pretty eagle eye when he wanted to, and he looked down at me and he said, very definitely, he said, yes, if they want peace, they can have it.
¿Pero con quién hablaría Reagan de paz en el Kremlin? En marzo de 1984, Yuri Andropov murió. Su sucesor, Konstantin Chernenko, estaba demasiado delicado para iniciar el diálogo. Occidente esperó una pequeña señal de cambio.
We needed to try to search out the people who would guide the Soviet Union after Brezhnev, after Andropov. And looking around, there were about 2 or 3 possible people in terms of age and seniority. We dispatched invitations to all 3. It was pure chance that Gorbachev was the one who accepted first. When Gorbachev came to the United Kingdom, he indeed brought his wife, and that was one of the first signs that we were dealing with someone quite different. Soviet leaders very, very rarely traveled with their wives anywhere.
I'm cautiously optimistic. I like Mr. Gorbachev. We can do business together. We both believe in our own political systems. He firmly believes in his. I firmly believe in mine. We're never going to change one another.
We better hang on from that.
Marzo de 1985. Konstantin Chernenko había muerto. En el funeral, los líderes mundiales presentaron sus respetos a Mikhail Gorbachev y midieron al nuevo hombre joven a cargo de la Unión Soviética.
George Bush was there. As vice president, he was head of our delegation. When we walked out of that meeting, I said to George, I said, this is a very different Soviet leader than any we've seen before.
Los rusos también notaron la diferencia.
Gorbachev was greeted with great enthusiasm. Everyone cheered in our institute. We were all pleased that such an energetic and educated person had become the new Secretary General of our Communist Party.
We expected a miracle. We thought he was the Messiah who had come to introduce change.
The state of the Soviet Union and its society could be described very simply with a phrase used by people across the country. We can't go on living like this any longer. That applied to everything. The economy was stagnating, there were shortages, and the quality of goods was very poor.
Gorbachev tomó el control de una superpotencia enferma por el colapso social, la corrupción en el Partido Comunista y el alcoholismo. Para enfrentar estas enfermedades y revivir la economía deteriorada, Gorbachev declaró la reconstrucción o perestroika y un nuevo espíritu de honestidad, glasnost.
I remember very clearly what Gorbachev said at that time. He said, there are 2 roads we can take. We can either tighten our belts very, very tightly and reduce consumption, which the people will no longer tolerate. Or we can try to diffuse international tension and overcome the disagreement between East and West, and so free up the gigantic sums that are spent on armaments in the Soviet Union.
En Washington, Reagan tuvo que vencer la oposición en el interior de su propia administración, antes de conocer al nuevo hombre en el Kremlin.
I truly believe that Ronald Reagan would have had the foreign policy battle of his life, if not the broadly political battle of his life, starting within his own party and across this country, if he had tried to reach out to Gorbachev without a seconder for his point of view.
But you want to. But you need to get away.
It took Margaret Thatcher to talk first with the Gorbachev and then to publicly say, this is a man we can deal with.
Ginebra, Suiza, noviembre de 1985. El escenario de la primera cumbre de superpotencias en 6 años estaba listo. Reagan también estaba muy interesado en averiguar si podía negociar con Gorbachev.
I felt always that President Reagan was exactly the kind of man that Russians, under normal circumstances, would have really liked. The kind of American that they would really like. First of all, he was kind of an icon, he's a cowboy. And they loved that. And the other was that he was very patriotic You really had the sense that he was going to break into God Bless America every time you saw him, and it wasn't corny. He really believed it. And Soviet Union, even some of the most hardened, cynical Soviets, really respected patriotism.
Muchas personas en Occidente se preguntaron si Ronald Reagan, de 74 años, podría con un Mikhail Gorbachev de 54 años.
The president's aide came in and said, Mr. President, you know, do you want to put your coat on? And he said, no, I'm not sure. And somebody said, well, it's very cold outside. You should really wear a coat. It was announced that the Soviet cavalcade was at the gates. And Reagan turned and, without putting on his overcoat, walked to the door. And there was much speculation as to whether this tired old man, President of the United States, could keep up with this wily, energetic, young, vigorous communist. And to the amazement of the world, the old man goes down the steps, lickety-split, meets and greets the Soviet leader, who comes out all bundled up in an overcoat, hat, muffler, looking as though he were in Iceland rather than Geneva.
La agenda de la cumbre, derechos humanos, Afganistán y el control de armas era abrumadora, pero el lenguaje corporal era alentador. De inmediato los dos líderes tuvieron una reunión privada.
20 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by, 40 minutes went by, and the White House guy who keeps the schedule going came around to me, and he said, I should go in and let them know they're going overtime. And I said, if you do that, you should be fired. The name of the game, it shows they're getting along.
¿Pero realmente se estaban llevando bien?
I returned at the break to meet my colleagues. They asked, what's your impression? I said, I have met a caveman, a dinosaur.
Los dos líderes estaban divididos, sobre todo por la iniciativa de defensa estratégica de Reagan, la Guerra de las Galaxias.
Are you getting along?
See that, can't you?
It was a shouting match, not angry as much as two people, as I said, passionate in their views, with diametrically opposed positions. And this was the occasion in which the president said, but you must believe that this is so important for the safety of the world that I will give you the technology as we develop it. And Gorbachev laughed and said, Mr. President, surely you understand I can't believe that since you won't even give us the technology for milking machines.
Mikhail Gorbachev se fue de Ginebra sin un acuerdo sobre su objetivo principal, frenar la carrera armamentista. Pero Estados Unidos y la Unión Soviética conversaban de nuevo. Un año en la era de Gorbachev y la Guerra Fría continuaba. El llamado de Ginebra para una segunda cumbre fue pospuesto repetidamente. Permaneció el temor de una guerra nuclear e incluso aumentó.
During that period, we had a lot of ideological training. We were constantly told about Reagan's speeches, so we called the US imperialists the evil empire. We started going out to sea twice as often. We kept a huge number of submarines in the sea all the time, as close as possible to the US and British coasts. And the more submarines we sent out to sea, the more you sent out. This dangerous concentration and proximity of nuclear submarines could lead to unpredictable consequences.
El desastre nuclear sí ocurrió, pero no entre las dos superpotencias. En abril de 1986, una explosión rompió el reactor número 4 en la planta nuclear de Chernobyl, en Ucrania, al norte de Kiev. El desastre resaltó la incompetencia del sistema soviético, cuando varios voluntarios iniciaron la tarea mortal de limpiar el extenso derrame radioactivo.
Рядом была больница, 6-я больница, куда привезли сразу же первых обожженных.
The firemen who got burnt while helping to extinguish the blaze were brought to a hospital near where I lived.
Первые приняли на себя этот удар.
At the time, people knew nothing about radiation, and there was a lot of confusion about how it was transmitted.
Произошла вот эта путаница в понятиях. И потом...
The firemen died very soon after, and when they were buried, people were scared that the radiation would spread from their graves.
Из могил.
Chernobyl, sus alrededores y grandes áreas de Ucrania y Bielorrusia estaban altamente contaminadas y despobladas.
Gorbachev knew even before that catastrophe about the danger of nuclear weapons. That explosion showed that even without war and without nuclear missiles, nuclear power could destroy humankind.
Reykjavik, Islandia, la segunda cumbre de Reagan y Gorbachev. Esta vez Gorbachev decidió revisar de nuevo la primera propuesta de Reagan para el control de armas, conocida como la opción cero. Reagan había ofrecido no desplegar los misiles Crucero y Pershing en Europa si los soviéticos retiraban sus cohetes SS-20. Brezhnev había rechazado la propuesta de Reagan. Los nuevos misiles estadounidenses fueron colocados en Europa. Ahora Gorbachev quería hacer un trato.
He understood that perestroika and the internal changes were starting to slow down, that he had little time on his hands. He had to decide. Either he could free up resources from the arms race, or he'd be forced to look for them elsewhere. I was with him when he decided to confront Reagan with the question, did he or didn't he want an agreement? Did he or didn't he want disarmament?
Ronald Reagan sí quería el desarme, pero renunciaría a su iniciativa de defensa estratégica IDE.
I said, okay, let's not even leave 100 missiles. Let's abolish them completely and go for the zero option. This came as a shock. Everyone was surprised.
Reagan hit the table and said, well, why didn't you say so in the first place? That's exactly what I want to do. And if you want to do away with all weapons, I'll agree to do away with all weapons. All weapons, of course, we'll do away with all weapons. Good. That's great. Now we have an agreement, yes. But you must confine SDI to the laboratory. No, I won't, said Reagan. No way. SDI continues. I told you that. I am never going to give up SDI.
I think that my principal position was and remains the same. The nuclear arms race should never be taken into space. It was difficult enough to limit the nuclear arms race on Earth.
Gorbachev pressed and pressed, and at one moment, President Reagan, who was very clear in his mind about this, wrote a little note and pushed it over at me. It said, George, am I right? I read this note. I said, absolutely, and passed it back.
La oportunidad de lograr el acuerdo más importante desde el comienzo de la Guerra Fría, la eliminación de todas las armas nucleares de Estados Unidos y la Unión Soviética, excepto 100 armas cada país, se perdió.
I have never felt so sad for a person in my life as I did for Ronald Reagan. He had been at it for 2 days. He had come, as he said to me, raising his fingers, Don, we were that close to an agreement, and he wouldn't give in.
¿Pero qué pensaban los soviéticos?
At first glance, I would say that Reykjavik almost failed because we were unable to sign an agreement. But later, as we went to our press conference, Gorbachev and I spoke in the car, and we agreed that it was not a failure. And it was at that press conference that Gorbachev uttered a phrase which became famous. that it had been an intellectual breakthrough in relations between the United States and the Soviet Union.
La amiga de Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, estaba muy preocupada.
We were frankly caught quite badly by surprise when we learned that discussions were encompassing the concept of abolishing nuclear weapons altogether. That would, of course, laid waste the doctrine of nuclear deterrence, and we would have been left without the very center of our strategy. Luckily, from our point of view, the Reykjavik Agreement never came to anything because the Russians pushed their luck too far.
Moscú. Otro avión extranjero abre una brecha en el espacio aéreo soviético. Los transeúntes observaron con asombro cómo el avión liviano Cessna aterrizaba en la Plaza Roja. El piloto era Matthias Rust, un joven de Alemania Occidental.
Rust himself was treated extremely humanely. Imagine if something like this had happened before Gorbachev's time. There would have been no dialogue. He would have simply been lined up against the wall and shot the next day.
Gorbachev liberó a Rust, pero usó la incursión como excusa para deshacerse de varios miembros del alto comando soviético. Los medios, la máquina de fax y la computadora estaban abriendo la Unión Soviética. Gorbachev y el Politburó veían televisión por satélite en sus oficinas. Después del boicot olímpico, los Juegos de la Buena Voluntad de 1986 se vieron en vivo en ambos lados de la cortina de hierro. La televisión soviética estaba cambiando. Se arriesgó a transmitir en vivo un debate con Margaret Thatcher.
So don't you think that the concept of nuclear deterrence, in fact, invites the side that believes in it to use the nuclear weapons in the end, just to prove this threat from time to time?
Isn't a policy of conventional weapons, with the terrible bombs raining down, with the missiles, with the aircraft, with the submarines, with the torpedoes, with the tanks, with chemical weapons, isn't that based on the possibility of threat?
I felt very embarrassed for our journalists. It was so painful to watch. At first, I was a little hurt. Then I was roaring with laughter. It was on this occasion that she made so many fans.
And we're saying to anyone who dares to attack us, do not do it. You couldn't win. The result will be devastating. I think you're saying the same.
I have to say that Margaret Thatcher was one of the politicians with whom it was very important to maintain a dialogue, because she was a very strong personality and a strong politician. And in spite of us constantly arguing with her at every meeting we had, we respected each other's position.
La política glasnost de Gorbachev dejó al descubierto la cultura pop.
A new breed of young people was created by our intellectuals, a breed that rejected all our Soviet past. This was moral degradation. Our youth was being turned into human robots.
El pueblo soviético se sometió a un cambio brusco.
We became particularly worried by the end of 1987. We saw that the country was not going in the direction it should. The situation of the people was getting worse and worse. The situation of the armed forces was no better.
Gorbachev reaccionó a la creciente oposición, impulsando los planes de reforma del Partido Comunista.
И все-таки все то, что мы развернули через реформу, через демократию вот эту, через советы, через трудовые коллективы, через вот эти вещи все, включения, вот это только путь. К этому надо. Там уже вы, власть в натуре будете.
The main achievement of Gorbachev's policies was that in the space of a year or two, he made the fear disappear, as if by magic. People had lost their fear of speaking and acting freely.
If I hadn't promoted the reforms, if I hadn't tried to let the people breathe freely, if I hadn't tried to open the door to glasnost and democracy, to stir the society, to get it thinking and acting, I would probably still be in my Secretary General's armchair today. I could have stayed there a lot longer, since I'm still quite young.
Washington, D.C. Ronald Reagan insistía todavía en su visión de la Guerra de las Galaxias. El Kremlin pensaba que nunca se realizaría y por lo tanto no debería retrasar los acuerdos de reducción de armas. Gorbachev, en Estados Unidos por primera vez, había venido a firmar un tratado histórico. Su visita, transmitida en vivo en la televisión soviética, mejoró su posición en casa y en el mundo.
All I'd ever seen of Soviet leaders was Khrushchev banging his shoe on the table and some old men in drab uniforms all looking like Mao Zedong, you know, and had no personality and looked like they were zombies. Here comes Gorbachev. He was wearing a good, well-cut Brooks Brothers suit and a tie. He even had on a white shirt. He was outgoing. He was meeting people. He was joking. And he was getting along with people in Washington, D.C.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union.
Un refrán ruso que Reagan había aprendido de Suzanne Massie ahora parecía apropiado.
The Russians like to talk in proverbs. It would be nice for you to know a few. And I said, you're an actor. You can learn them very quickly. And I gave him this. Mrs. Reagan was with us at the time, and she liked this one. And I said, here it is, and it was Doveryai, no Proveryai.
Mr. General Secretary, though my pronunciation may give you difficulty, the maxim is Doveryai, no Proveryai. Trust but verify.
Назначение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
I know of no one else of a leadership stature in the United States in those days who would have moved forward as Reagan did to engage Gorbachev, to engage the Western Alliance, to truly lead the Western Alliance, and to take us through what became, of course, a very constructive, introductory period to the end of the Cold War.
Можем даже обменяться.
I think we should change
Ronald Reagan y Mikhail Gorbachev firmaron un acuerdo de largo alcance. Por primera vez, una categoría entera de armas nucleares sería abolida. Frente a las cámaras del mundo, Estados Unidos destruyó sus misiles crucero y Pershing. Los soviéticos desmantelaron sus SS-20. Marcando otro hito en la disminución de la tensión de la Guerra Fría, los equipos de inspección de ambos países supervisaron la destrucción. En su último año como presidente, Ronald Reagan realizó su primera visita al Kremlin. Lo que Mikhail Gorbachev y los periodistas querían saber era qué pensaba Ronald Reagan de la Unión Soviética ahora.
You still think you're in an evil empire, Mr. President?
No. Он заявил, что
He said he wanted to take back his reference to the Soviet Union as the evil empire. He found a good place to announce it, right in the middle of the Kremlin. But nevertheless, he said that he was doing it not because he was wrong when he initially said it, but because by 1988, the Soviet Union had come a long way under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev. It had become a different country.
Why we find ourselves standing like this?
Juntos, los dos líderes aprovecharon la oportunidad.